So with this camera, if I were to reach out to press record and accidentally tap the LCD screen, it cancels the autofocus. I don't know why you would ever want to do that. I'll explain why I bring this up after the intro. Hey, Shaka Bras, welcome to the Fireside. My name is Jake. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to have you here for this illustrative tattooing series that we've been working on for the last month or so. This is the third installment of that series where the goal is really just to dive in deep with some of my favorite illustrative style tattooers and get into the processes, the mental and physical kind of processes that they use when creating narratives or storytelling within their work. And if you haven't watched the last few episodes, this is really about creating tattoos that either really drive a narrative that is very clear and understandable, or inspire you to create your own narrative, your own story for the tattoo. And I've really been into this kind of stuff lately. So this series is kind of selfish on my part. It's just me reaching out to some of my favorite illustrative style tattooers and picking their brains and trying to find new kind of ideas for my own work. And hopefully it helps you in your work as well. Today, I'm super excited to introduce Rich Wren. This is, the second or third time that he's been on the show. And we first met Rich back at the Evergreen Tattoo Invitational several years back in Eugene, Oregon. That's Joshua Carlton's show, really fun show. And I loved Rich's style, his sketches when I first came across his booth at the Evergreen show, his subject matter, his use of line weight, his use of line as texture, all that stuff I thought was just super, super cool. And then when I saw his finished tattoos and the way that he uses, punchy color in some areas and really desaturated, muted color in other areas, I've really kind of followed his work ever since. So I was really happy that he agreed to come on and share some of his processes and ideas on creating really unique narratives in his own work and kind of recurring themes and things like that. So I hope you get as much out of this episode as I did. Real quickly before we start, I want to thank our sponsors, our affiliate sponsors, and our regular sponsors. Everyone that I'm about to mention has a link in the show notes below, which will get you a discount on their products, and hopefully they're products that you're already buying, or products that tattooers need to do their jobs. So thank you to S8 Tattoo. If you're looking for really great stencil paper, they actually own Spirit as well, the stencil paper that we all use. But I love the S8 red paper. I've been using it for years, and I'll never use purple paper again. It's too dark and hard to wipe off for me. Numa Tattoo Machines, thanks to Carson Hill and Numa Tattoo Machines. I've been using the Numa 4 for close to a year now, and I really, really love that machine. My friend Guy Aitchison and Gabe Ripley at Reinventing the Tattoo, they're putting out tons of tattoo education content all of the time. It's $300 a year for the subscription. You get 10% off if you use the code Fireside, and the link there is below. Also TSM Pro for all of your tattoo admin, social media kind of marketing and advertising needs. Go to tsmpro.com, or actually just follow the link in the video description below to make sure that you get the discount on all of TSM Pro's services. That's it. Let's get to the episode, and I hope you enjoy it. Oh, wait, one last thing. I almost forgot. You know how in the intro I was talking about that focus cancel function on this camera? I'm blurry in this entire episode. I hit record and accidentally canceled the focus and never realized it. So Rich is in perfect focus and I'm blurry in this interview. So enjoy that. So first, what got you drawing in the style that you do? Did you always draw in kind of an illustrative storytelling type of?
Yeah. I always tried to, I don't know, I guess like you said, kind of tell a story within it, I suppose. But just to take something really simple would be let's just say somebody not in the occult realm, not into the spooky stuff that I tend to I'm more attracted to. But let's just take flower just because it's really simple. You could just do a flower. You could just do, let's just take a rose, for example. You can just do a rose, but then, there's different steps in the progress of when a rose grows, so like you have buds, so you add buds in, you have these leaves, and in the case of, like anything like a bellflower, there's a point where it doesn't open up yet. You can draw those in addition to it. So you kind of go down a little rabbit hole and research the subject matter you're looking into, and you find more. And how do you add that in? And it makes it a little bit more interesting by adding the process. Now you could take that same idea and apply it to pretty much anything. I went on a vampire rampage for a while. And most of that comes from my interest in just, spooky stuff in general, or vampires, or the story of it. And, so like, it's like every culture has their vampire. So why not look further? There's the Chinese hopping vampire, which, I drew one and it never got done because I think most people don't even know, because culturally it's not an American thing where they walk around like a zombie with their arms outstretched. They have a note pinned to their head that's supposed to stop them from waking up and all that kind of stuff. And they hop instead of creep at you, so like stuff like that. So, I just do a lot of research into it and everything. So I just kind of took that one thing where I just looked further into flowers, let's just say, found that, and then move forward from there. So I kind of apply that to a lot of things that I do.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing that it seems like you have in common, our last guest was Teresa Sharp, and she's throwing out her own ideas, kind of like you. She's into kind of similar stuff, actually.
She's awesome.
Yeah. But she isn't really getting much input at all from her clients. She is putting out 10 or 12 ideas that she'd like to play with. Says who wants these, and she's basically just selling the idea and then creating the drawing. You, I guess, are doing something similar because you put out a lot of, I hate to call it flash because it's not really flat, but to an extent, I mean, I guess it is. It's pre-made kind of ideas that you're selling that idea. So I guess one question is how often do you even have client involvement in the design process?
I don't know. Probably not too often. Not too often. Like typically what ends up happening is I'll get the classic email, and we'll discuss everything, and I get all their information that they want to include. I'll shoot back some questions like, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about this? Do you want this included? Would you like to, do you want me to stay away from certain things that I absolutely need to know? But then when they tell me that they would like to critique it and they want to see it beforehand, I just say, no, look at my artwork, look at my Instagram, determine whether or not I'm the right person for you. If I am, great. If not, let's not go any further, because I don't want to keep your deposit if you cancel on me when you see this, So it's like, do you trust me to do what's right, within my abilities? You could ask me to be somebody else in my drawings and show me all of these ideas that other tattooers had, or you can trust me to do what's right by what I'm capable of and what I see in my artistic vision, if you will,
Yeah.
So, like clients oftentimes always want to kind of like weasel in and try to change things because they know better, and, so I would say like, there's also all these people that are kind of like around the perimeter of what I'd like to do. Like, I like doing vampires, but then I get requests for like Mask of the Red Death. And I never really thought to do a Poe tattoo before, but it was cool and interesting to jump into it and like how I would go in that angle. So, it's like I get requests of really cool stuff like that I never would have thought to do before, and then you get those requests where it's American flag with We the People, and I want it realism, black and gray, and it's, so, those ones I have to kind of like, give to somebody that I feel is better suited for that work. Like they just see clean, solid work and they think, oh, he wants to do my, American flag tattoo,
Right.
So I guess I don't get too much, meddling in it. Like they tend to trust me, because they found what they wanted in me, at least that's what I hope.
Yeah. Yeah. I would guess that's true. And that's the reason I asked that question, is because I wonder, because I guess both approaches kind of have their advantages and disadvantages. One, that if you're able to draw, like you are able to just draw from your own, from the imagery or the ideas, the stories that interest you, and sell those directly to the client as a tattoos, that's really fantastic, because you really got to see your vision kind of all the way through. But then, to your earlier point, sometimes a client brings an idea to the conversation that you may not have ever considered. And then you get to kind of play with that idea and kind of make it your own. So you don't really have a preference for one of those approaches over the other, or do you?
No, not really. Obviously I'd prefer to do, like you said, you don't want to call it flash. Let's call them wanna-dos, you know what I mean? Or flash or whatever. Yeah, I would prefer to do that, because like you said, it's something that I sat down and I was like, I want to see this all the way through, and I would like to do it on somebody. Yeah, I would love that. And I find that a lot of the work that I do, this probably answers your earlier question, but a lot of the work that I want to do, what ends up happening is like, I'll do, let's just say, the Mask of the Red Death. Somebody sees that and they're like, I want that. Or they see that flash I drew and it's already been claimed. I get to go back and do that again. I wanted to do that anyway. I get to draw a new Mask of the Red Death and maybe try out a different direction that I didn't think about the first time around. Because, I don't repeat tattoos on clients. I give them a unique custom piece every time. Mm-hmm. So I find that happens a lot, where I get to keep doing these really cool things over and over and over again. I've been doing a lot of death head moths. So I've gotten to take a really good look at that, like a dozen times, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So I get repeats in that way, where it's like, I can't do that one. Sorry, but I'll draw you a new one. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. As far as the process goes, let's just say, something that you're kind of creating completely on your own. Whenever you are, when you're kind of brainstorming the idea, do you like to draw out whatever sketches, compositional sketches, just hash out the ideas first and then start to look for whatever reference you might look for, or dive deeper? Or do you tend to dive deep into the story first, grab reference, and then draw?
I'm a reference first kind of guy, but I would say I'm a reference first kind of guy. Like I do a deep reference for, let's just say, like, I look up, girl faces or girls in positions. And then, I use that as a reference where I look at it to draw out a girl, a Medusa or whatever it may be. And then I draw it in its entirety in the first time, and I finish out that design. And if I don't like it, or if there's something I want to do that's different, I do another one, and I'll change all those things I didn't like. It won't even look like the previous one. Maybe I'll take a different angle, a different approach, maybe add different elements in it. And oftentimes for clients, I have 2 to sometimes 3 different drawings for them to pick from. And more times than not, they want to combine. I saw there's little teeth in this thing on this drawing. I like what you did with the ropes here. And I like what you did with the bottle here, if it's a potion bottle, let's just say. And then I have to combine one item of all 3 of my drawings into a 4th drawing. That tends to happen a lot, unfortunately, because I just give out. Like I said, I find something really cool in this first one. I draw in its entirety, but I really want to try this cool thing out. And I draw that one out. And then they just happen to like the cool thing in both. Right. I want to put it on. So, I give the person the full day. I normally only do one a day, because it's a lot larger work that I end up working on. But oftentimes, like, I have to like kind of maybe draw a 4th example, so it happens. But I think that's another thing, because I draw so quickly, I'm able to produce 4 examples of potion bottles that all have those elements that you want in it: a Leviathan's cross, eyeballs, and teeth. I'll draw 4 different ways to do that, with 4 different bodies and 4 different sets of eyeballs and teeth, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So
yeah.
So I do my research. I look, or let's just say I know I want eyeballs in there. I'll draw my eyeballs, and then I'll maybe look at a picture of an eyeball just to make sure I get all the details perfect. And on a steel trap.
Why do you think, what made you see each drawing through to the very end instead of thumbnailing or doing like quick kind of iterations, just to see what composition you like the most? You just feel like you need to see it through to the end?
I just need to see it through all the way. There are times though where while I'm drawing, if I feel like there's that drawing's not going to be fruitful, I'll stop and I just start over again. But I don't get very far before that happens. When I can tell I'm forcing it, I stop and then I come at it a different angle. I think it's just because of the speed I draw. Like it's not, it doesn't bother me to do a second one or a third one, instead of thumbnailing, like I just never thumbnailed before. Like, I think doing a lot of the research for references and everything also helps, because I start to develop a picture in my mind, what I want it to look like, how I'd like it to lay, and what elements I can use to like better, curve with the body, or what I can add into it that makes it more fun or whatever. Like while looking for those references, the picture starts to develop in my head, and then I just draw it out in its entirety. And then while drawing it out, realize that, oh, wow, it'd be really cool if I went this way. I'll do that in the next one, and then I just draw a second one.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're doing the kind of one-offs or the want-tos that aren't for a particular client, are you drawing with an idea of where it belongs on the body? I guess you're prepared to make changes if someone were to walk up at a show and want it, but they don't want it on their forearm. They want it on their shoulder.
Absolutely.
But you draw with an idea of where this would belong on a body.
Yeah, absolutely. I just did a bunch of I called them laser snakes, but I did these like laser snakes where the cobras or snakes turned into kind of like lightning bolt kind of looking like stuff, or lightning snakes, if you want to call it that. And it was specific for a client. He wanted it on a side head, down neck, onto trap, and I drew 3 of those. And it was drawn specifically for that part of the body, which is a very distinct shape, right? So I immediately got an email asking a request, or saying that this guy told me I have a perfect spot for this. And I was thinking, well, if it's not on your head, it's not the perfect spot for this. You know what I mean? Like, but if he were to say, want it on his forearm, I would just draw a new version for his forearm, but I typically keep things in mind. A lot more portrait shape than landscape shape, because landscape is so much more limited on its placement. I draw things that would kind of easily go on like the side calf, but also the forearm, but again, like you said, you can change things as you go, or just redraw it in entirety, I have no problem with hustling and working hard to redraw something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As far as like the specifics kind of your style and how it's evolved, like you mentioned potion bottle, you mentioned rope. Those are things we see a lot as like secondary elements a lot of times in your work. When you're pulling reference, or I don't even know if you do pull reference for any of those types of things anymore, because you include them so often, but not much. Yeah. But when you do need something like that, are you looking mostly at photo reference? Do you look at other illustrators or painters that you like? Do you pull reference from other artists, or just from photographs in life more often?
Photographs of life. Mostly that. Occasionally, I'm like anybody else. I go through Instagram, or I go through like Pinterest or whatever, and I see things that are inspiring or that like look cool, but I'll never go back to that and draw it verbatim. It just kind of gets lost in the mix, and I forget that I have it, saved on my phone. When it comes to things like the ropes and potion bottles, like you said, those come out of my head, and that just comes from experience. I told you previously that I went to school for glass blowing. So I have a bachelor's in glass blowing, so I already know and understand glass, how it's made, like handmade glass. So there's certain details in my potion bottles where like a glass blower will pick up on it and be like, all right, I know what he's doing there, where, and then there was an artist I was really interested in when I was in college. I can't remember his name right now. I think his name's Tim something, but he got really into wrapping things with rope. And I believe he was an outsider artist. I think he might have Down syndrome, and he's an outsider artist, but he's really obsessed with wrapping things with rope. And that just always stuck out to me when I was in college. So I feel like that came over. I like that idea of like the binding of things. It also has a lot to do with like witch imagery. So, you know, I look at actual witch ladders, you know, I look at actual like, records of like what they found that witches had, you know, in their bottles, like bent nails and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, obviously the spookiness you got to throw in there too, you know, teeth, just for the sake of putting teeth in, because that's so visceral, you know, like to think about.
Yeah. Do you keep like banks of photos of reference that you can access? I know a lot of people are pretty organized, and they'll like have Dropbox folders with peonies and other with roses and these with snakeheads. And do you just collect and kind of archive reference a lot?
Like if I see a rose, you know, like a picture of a rose, I'll put it in my like little rose file on Pinterest. If I see, like, if I'm looking for dynamic poses, if I just see one that doesn't apply to what I'm working on today, I'll still save it for a later date and be able to look at like how the body was moving in that position. Or, you know, you see a cool looking tiger, you just toss it in your thing. You might not do a tiger tomorrow, but you might in a year. So you got those cool tigers all ready to go, you know, but, yeah, I guess I do. I'm not like religious about it though.
Yeah. I'll go through phases. Like you mentioned Pinterest. I'll go through phases where I'll be looking for something specific and I'll go through Pinterest for reference. And then, like you said, I'll find a reference that seems really cool for something else. So I have all these little boards that I'll throw it to. And then I never go back and actually look at that stuff whenever it's time to draw something. I don't know why. It just doesn't occur to me to like, oh, do I have a board for that? I should go look and see if I have any. You know, I mean, I know that sometimes I was looking just the other day and I saw that I had a board that was just called Color Palettes, and it was just all these painters, illustrators, photographers, whatever, that just had cool like color palettes that I liked. And I was like, that'd be cool. I remember thinking I could grab those, pull them into Procreate or Photoshop, and just grab swatches from those, and then use them. And but I never actually do it. I just went through the work to make the board, I guess, and save a few.
But you know, it's lingering there. It's in there. You know, it's just. You know, like sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't, you know, like, you know, like I can draw, I could easily draw, you know, a girl without having to look at pictures, but looking at pictures just kind of helps you along a little bit further. Maybe, you know, some girl has a nose that looks a certain way that you like better than the nose you typically draw. Maybe, you know, maybe you want to get a different, you know, like smirk on her face. So you want to kind of see where that little like thing happens, you know, stuff like that. But, you know, like you like you said, you put it in there and then you come back to it if you need it, you know, or when you need it, you know.
Yeah. How important, or is it at all important to you for people to get the narrative that you're kind of that you're putting out there in any particular piece? Like, say someone, you know, say you're at a show and you've got pieces sitting there ready to go that someone wants to. I mean, how do you feel? I guess a better way to ask that is, how do you feel about people's kind of creating their own interpretation for what that piece is about, as opposed to what you intended when you put it together?
Well, you know, I'm cool with whatever, either way it goes. You know, like I was reading through this book called Man, Myth, Magic. It's the encyclopedia for the occult. It was printed in the 1970s. It was published in 1970. And it's a little outdated in some of the things it says, you know, here and there, where, you know, describing certain things, you know, that just wouldn't fly nowadays. But it's got a lot of really cool stuff, you know, if you forget some of the stuff they talk about in it. But it's like, I think 28, I think it has 28 books in the entire encyclopedia. And I leave that at the shop. I just pick a random number and I'll flip through it and read something real, you know, that might interest me when it comes to like red ropes, for example. You know, that's worked into a lot of witchcraft type things. And I drew this egg. Apparently, I can't remember the exact details right now, just because it was a couple months ago. But they were talking about the way you stop getting, I think it was maybe the plague, was you put hair into an egg and you like smash it in the street. So I drew an egg with hair in it, and I put some, some black magic and little stars around it just to imply further that it's a little bit deeper than just an egg with hair in it. And, it got a good response because I told the story in my post when I posted it. And people really like that. I found something that I found inherently interesting. I made a design to try to make it interesting to other people. Some people need a little bit further because that's really an obscure thing. Some people need a little bit more, and they need that little thing at the bottom of the painting in the museum. Oh, this was painted at this time because of this and during this period, and that's why it's so important to time. People, they see the egg with the hair. When I tell them what it's about, it becomes so much more interesting and it becomes way cooler. So like sometimes it's important that somebody gets the narrative, and other times I'm perfectly fine with people just taking it their own way. Like I listen to a lot of audiobooks. It's pretty much what I do. Like when I draw and when I drive, pretty much all the time. And a lot of the audiobooks I listen to are vampire books, but they're comedy vampire books. They're comedy horror, and it's funny, or the vampire is actually sweet, or whatever it may be, or they're taking out the classic Twilight sparkly vampire, when this like old, really ancient vampire just is incredulous about everything in our society at the moment. I can't really do that and pull that and put that across in my tattooing, because a very, very small group of people will understand who this character is. But what I can do is do vampires because it's fun, and it's just fun. Even though I don't take it serious. I'm not, I don't drink blood. But I do find the stories fun, and it's really interesting. What We Do in the Shadows is probably one of my favorite movies. I've seen it maybe 100 times, put it on the shop on loop almost. And when the show came out, it introduced that comedy to the world, and it's pretty awesome. So even though there's no comedy in my vampire tattoos, it's still that's its birthplace. I try to make them look more elegant. Like I try to make them look prettier, and because when I've tried to make them look ugly, nobody likes them. So.
Yeah. That a couple of things you just said, in addition to talking about looking at for subtle things like a smirk on a face, or you mentioned a red rope, and I've noticed a lot of times you have your ropes are red, or your hands, fingers on the hands are red, or something like that. How important is it to you? I assume it is important to make sure that you're doing something kind of new or unique that kind of keeps you engaged in that piece. Like if you're drawing the same piece 4 times or some variation of that piece, 4 times. Teresa Sharp had mentioned that she really is into things that are in the background. She's really into her backgrounds and sneaking little things in there that you may not notice. We talked to Andy Chambers, and he said that he's always looking for something in his piece that makes it, what's the term that he uses? Not extraordinary, but something that makes it exceptional to him. It's like, I can draw a dragon sleeve and all my clients will be blown away by it, but something about it needs to be exceptional to me, so that whenever I go back and look at it later, I remember what it was that like set that piece off for me. Do you have anything like that because you are using similar imagery, over and over? What are you looking for to kind of keep yourself engaged, if anything?
I find it really hard to keep repeating the same things over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. So I guess each time I want to try to keep it fresh. And I know that's not really conducive to being, internet successful, I guess, because, let's just say I did my witch hands, which I haven't done one in a while because I don't want them to look like what I had done previously. When I come back to that subject matter, I want it to be fresh. I want to take it on a whole new angle. So I'm staying above copies, or staying above my previous work even. I want them to look better than what I had done previous. And that's why, when you see like a witch hand, like people want to see the digits. They want to see the fingers do the thing, but it's a lot less interesting when you do this, right? You know, you don't really see anything going on. You might be able to put some ridges in there, maybe a finger sticking up, but it's not as interesting. So there, you know, I'm not saying you're limited because it is unlimitless, you know, or limitless rather, what you can do with a hand. But yeah, I guess like I also try to pull like a new element every time I revisit something. It's like I recently got to do an Erlenmeyer flask instead of a potion bottle that I do with like the pointed bottoms on them. And I was like, that's really cool. Absolutely. I would love to do an Erlenmeyer flask. Like I knew what that was right off the bat. I was like, hell yeah, let's do this. Science. Let's do science, you know, like, and I made it spooky. I made science spooky, like, you know, so I guess like some of those, you know, there's some small things that I'd like to see, whether it be the change of an angle, an addition of like a different kind of engagement of a background. Yeah, I definitely try to, I want it to be unique every time. And I feel like that stunts me, but it also makes me feel good about myself. Like I could just be doing the same popular design that caught on where somebody really, like, tons of people liked it on Instagram. It got a really good review. Everybody was like, yeah, great. I did 3 of them. And then at that point, I'm like, you know what? I need to kind of step back from this. Like, I'd rather keep making something fresh for me. You know, like I want to take a step forward every month, every week, every year, whatever it may be. You know, you can't really predict how you're going to feel every year, you know, or every month for that matter. So I hope that answered it. Like, absolutely. I just want to stay fresh.
And subtle changes and tweaking subject matter, whether it's tweaking the presentation of a hand or going from a potion bottle to a flask. Or those are little things that I was kind of looking for, that I thought that like you can render probably the way that you render a flask and a potion bottle. You're not intimidated by the flask. You're like, all right, I can just change the shape of this and I know how to do it. But then you probably learn a few things. That's just some little nugget of it that's kind of different than what you're used to, and that you'll probably grab on and take to something else.
And this is where it goes back to what you said before. You're asking about you know, how much do clients have their fingers in or to give you direction. Sometimes that's what could be the inspiration, you know, like I was just asked to do a Pandora sleeve, and I had never done a Pandora before. So I looked her up, you know, and looked up the story and everything like that. And that was really interesting to me. And I feel like, you know, that could be the start of something else that's really great. Like, you know, you never know, you know, like, so, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. I always am surprised at how much I don't know whenever my clients come in with some new idea. And of course they present it like I you know, understand the story of whatever Pandora or whatever it is. And it's like,
you know, all about her, right?
Yeah. And then I have to go like, I'm going to have to research a little more on this, but I never would without their input. So yeah, you're absolutely right. We've talked a little bit about like the ideas where the piece might be placed and how that affects your design, like how you're getting reference and all that. What about you use a lot of linear texture and stuff like that in your pieces. So like, say your rope, for example, will have like nice bold outer lines. And then you kind of use a lot of small lines to kind of to create a lot of kind of visual texture. Do you have a set process for how you're going to approach color? Is it just that I know the rope is red, so everything else builds off of that? Is that really about how simple it is?
That's pretty much how simple it is. Okay. You know, or you just get like a kick. You find a color that's solid, just put out, and you're like, I'm really into this color right now. You know, like there was a period of time where I was really into the peyote color. You know, I was like, I'm going to try to get this in everything. I really love neon green. I think it might come from my childhood, you know, like Slimer from Ghostbusters, neon everything, you know, like when in the 90s and the late 80s and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like I really like those brighter colors, but I prefer to use more muted colors. And so there's like a battle that's always happening with me in there. Like, I love gold. I love that color, but I find that it becomes too important within the piece when I'm trying to use all muted everything else, So, so I guess, I also do ask what the client prefers. I don't want to give them a color they hate. If they hate pink, which pink is like one of my favorite colors to use, right? I don't want to do that to them if they don't want it, Mm-hmm. So I'll ask them kind of like, okay, so do you feel you want to go more warm or cool with this piece? Are you okay with muted, or do you want them to be nice and bright? And they typically, will say whatever you want. And, say, oh, well, let's just start here. This is the most important part. What color would you like this? Okay, great. And then I can kind of I stay very fluid in that way, where I base it off of our core color we're going to work with and then move forward from there.
Yeah. I think that's an important point, is also trying to get a gauge for what the client actually likes, or what I think it was in the first interview in the series, talking to Baxter, we were talking about, designing to the client's needs. And I was telling him about a piece I started recently that's just this kind of post-apocalyptic Memphis, where I live. So it's like our kind of little kind of like elements from our city that you would have to live here to know, not like the bridge or the skyline, but stuff, and I had it was this kind of like Aeon Flux type character with these kind of robots that have kind of destroyed the city. And I had it in my mind from the time that we created this piece that it was going to be a lot of bright, poppy 80s, like you're saying, kind of Miami Vice type color. And I don't know why. I normally work in more muted colors, and I wanted to do something bright and poppy. But then by the time we got through, a full session of lining the sleeve and 2 gray sessions, I had learned that this guy is just not through discussions, just by getting to know the guy. He's not a neon kind of dude, like it would have fit the piece fine. It just didn't fit his personality the way that I thought it should. And so I completely abandoned it, and we went with a much more muted, kind of darker palette. So, so I guess that kind of stuff can come from most anywhere.
Yeah. It really does. Just, I would say, honestly, color is the largest challenge for me. Color theory is the largest challenge. Like I feel I have no problem, or very little problem, illustrating like that. That's not my sticking point. But the color, like the actual color theory, is one thing that I feel like I still actively every day think about.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not like I would say not my strong point, but I can put it in bright. I can put it in solid. I feel like that's still a point where I need to, there have been times in my career that I've looked at my entire ink rack and then just took out the ones that I knew I don't want to use. And strangely enough, that was all the blues. All the blues were gone. I don't like cool colors. And I took out all these ones that I don't think I would want in my palette, because they didn't match the large overall base colors that I wanted to use. And then slowly over the years, you put some back, and you're like, oh, you know what? This works really well with this, So I do feel like it even though it's not my strongest suit, it's still something that I enjoy doing. I love doing black and gray, but people don't come to me for that.
Yeah. That's really great advice. I think limiting your palette just kind of out of just to simplify your process a little bit, and not allow yourself to become overwhelmed with options. That's a question I've asked people that we've interviewed a lot over the years, and it's funny, like to see how the opinions kind of run the gamut. Some people will put out 40 colors for every single tattoo because they say, well, if they're not out there, I won't use them. Like if they're out there, at least I have the option. I, on the other hand, if I have like 9 variations of, peaches, like peach and red and pink, and they're all like, or anything, like if I have a lot of variations, I start to just get confused on whether I'm warming something up, cooling it down, making it darker, making it lighter. So I tend to really simplify and use a pretty basic kind of palette of just like mostly bright colors, except for, just like you said earlier, I will just like cling to a color that someone puts out, that it'll be, whatever. It changes from time to time, but I've been through a handful that these muted kind of off tones that I've just decided that I love. So I'll have just like a bunch of bright colors and then just this one or two kind of muted colors that I've just found that I really like to use, and switch out only one or two at a time rather than just like putting out tons and tons of inks. At once. Let me one thing I've been trying to ask at the end of these, and if you don't have one, it's cool. Do you have an example of something of a good kind of illustrative or storytelling? You mentioned the egg, and that's definitely one that I'll put in there, but something maybe where a client came and there was either a really interesting collaboration or where a story that you were trying to illustrate really just came out super well, or something you were really proud of. Any particular projects stand out that might be helpful to I don't know, to anyone that's kind of getting into illustrative style tattooing?
I guess I just quickly looked at my Instagram and saw something. Okay. I have this one client. She's so rad. Like she's so awesome. But anyway, she told me, I want you to do a necromancer spell book. Or she said, what was it? I think she said spell book. I know that for a fact. I think she said maybe like dead, death, or spooky, or something along those lines. And I decided, I said, and I had a piece of flash I had drawn which said like necromancer on it. And I was like, are you cool with like, necromancy, like, raising the dead or the dead, And she was like, dude, just you do you, man. And I was like, okay. And I did this, I did a necromancer book where I did a skeleton hand holding a spell book. And then like a demon skull was like kind of fiery coming out of it. Has all the line weights that I use, all the line thicknesses I use. It has green outline, thing as well. And if I were to approach that now, after she told me, that's all she said was, spooky spell book, demon, something. I can't remember exactly what it was. And I came up with that design. If I were to sit down now and I said to myself, necromancer, I might just draw an actual man, casting a spell. If I had more space to do so, she said, I want this to be a whole half sleeve. I would approach that entirely different. But, I guess like, I double did the dead or triple did the dead. Cause you have necromancy, then you have a demon skull coming out of it with a skeleton hand holding it. That's not necessarily a story being told, but she gave me very little information. Yeah. And she said, I trust you, you do you, man. Yeah. And I was able to do a pretty sweet, I feel a pretty sweet tattoo for her that I'm like very proud of. And it like looks awesome. And I'd love to do more of those, and that little demon skull that I drew actually bled over to the Pandora sleeve that I'm working on. I just had a second session on it the day before yesterday, but I did those same types of demons coming out of Pandora's box. So, like that's something I had never done previous. Well, I've done it like maybe 15, 16 years ago. I did some demons flying around that were colorful, but I haven't done that in 15 or 16 years. And now I did it in two pieces within a couple months of each other. Yeah. So, like there's not only a story within that piece, that was a larger story within the body of my work. Yeah. I might just keep going with these demons until I'm exhausted with them. And then there'll be never be a demon ever again, never know. Yeah. Right. But I hopefully that
yeah,
helps.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. That's the kind of thing that I think is interesting to see how people get from whether it's their own idea, the client's idea to a result that we can actually like put out here and say, here's the finished piece. One thing that's cool about that is that the client was open to your interpretation. And I think that's something that just comes from time and kind of, longevity and tattooing and putting out consistently great work. A lot of times, with our viewers, they're earlier on sometimes in their careers, and there's a tendency for them to get micromanaged, by the client. So I think that those types of stories are really helpful because it's, I think each person kind of has to find their own way to get to that point where they kind of control that consultation process and tease out what the client really what the client really wants. I think Teresa was saying, like, the client will make a list of a few things that they want, and you grab onto one of those things because you think that it's cool. And then that turns out that was like the least important thing in their list. Like, So
yeah, that happens. That happens a lot. They want to overshare because they want to be as helpful as they possibly can. And a lot of times they could be reaching to give you more. Like they're looking for more instead of just saying like, look, man, I know I only have limited space for 2 things here. I'm going to give you 12 because I feel like I'm being very helpful, and I get it. I totally get it. But like you said, like, that like the longevity, getting to that point. But I still to this day, when I'm responding to emails, like have to say like, are you sure I'm the right client? Or sorry, are you sure I'm the right artist for you? Have you looked at my Instagram? Like, I know you're local to here. So are you just choosing me because I'm nearby, or are you choosing my work because you sent me references that aren't anything of what I do? And yeah, I know I tattooed your friend, but I don't do realism black and gray of Saint Michael with a thin blue line on his shield. Like that's not who I am. Are you positive you want me to take on your work? So like oftentimes like you just gotta kind of find the right client for you. But I feel like what the longevity is what makes those clients numerous,
right?
Like you have more that's coming to you. So yeah, and then in that way, when you're going through the consultation, if they say, yes, I'm 100% familiar with your work, I know what you do you, and I'm going to be happy, and you still get am I going to see the drawing tomorrow? It's like, your appointment's not for 4 months. What do you mean tomorrow?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to see you until like December. What do you mean? Did I draw it yet?
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of those things. I think it's funny that you like the clients do a good job of keeping it in the forefront of your mind, because they just assume that from the time you finish the consultation until the day of the tattoo appointment, you are as engaged that entire time in that drawing as they are.
Yeah.
And I had one actually not too long ago. I just ran into a guy at a local bar, and we have an appointment in 3 months or something like that. And he was like, "How's the drawing coming along?" And I was like,
just one stroke a day, a day, man.
Exactly. Perfect. Like right now,
I'm wasted for today.
That's exactly right. Yeah. When the truth is, like right now, I don't even know what your drawing is. Unfortunately,
I have to look back in our email, right? You know what I mean? I trust me, I'll get to it. It's just not going to be on your time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, man, I didn't want to keep you too long. We're getting close to an hour in. Thanks for doing it. I think this series is going to be really good as a whole. I'm hoping that even the people who are on who we interview for the series will watch everyone else. I think it could be a cool little like.
I'm going to. So yeah. I got to see what Teresa Sharp said.
Cool, man. Well, thank you. I'll talk to you in the next couple of weeks.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks. Bye. Hey, thanks again for watching. Please be sure to like and comment and subscribe to our channel so you can stay up to date with all of the things that we are doing. If you would like to buy us a drink, please support us on Patreon. There's a button somewhere around here that allows you to do that. You can also visit our website and subscribe to our newsletter so you know where we're headed and what we're doing. And while you're there, please check out our merchandise page. Buy yourself a fancy new Fireside t-shirt. Thank you for supporting the Fireside Tattoo Network, and we'll see you on the next episode.